Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Jobs Report podcast brought to you by Swob. I'm your host, Alexander, and thank you again for joining. Today we have a really interesting guest, a really cool guest with a really interesting story that I think a lot of our users and a lot of our audience is going to really resonate with and find almost very relatable, being a younger audience who is hustling and pivoting and trying to do new things. So Chris Wilson is our guest, and Chris here has a really interesting story, and I'm really excited to have him join us. So Chris went from flying to founder, is a 14-year aviation and career expert, and now is a full-time founder of Mentee and a two-time author and a TEDx speaker. So thank you, Chris, for joining. I think before we jump in, before we get into some of the questions that I have, I'm just kind of curious, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, kind of your story, how you started, where you pivoted, and kind of what you're doing now.
Yeah, I'll do the Cole's notes of my story. Thanks so much for having me, Alexander, and hope everyone's doing well out there, staying warm. My story started in and around Toronto, Ontario, Canada. If you know where that is, it's actually where Alexander is. And that's kind of where it started. So it was really started as a dream of what do I want to do? What do I want to do when I grow up? And how do I answer that question? I had no idea what I wanted to do in school, out of school. So I took a gap year out of high school and I was like, what is that thing? So I started researching on Google and I knew I wanted to do something different. I wanted something adventurous. I wanted something that involved travel. And I didn't want to sit at a desk. I didn't want a boring job, so to speak, if that's a boring job. And so I came across helicopters. That was one thing I'm like, wow, helicopters, that's cool. That's amazing. That sounds like something that I might actually want to do. And so I packed my bag. I booked a one-way ticket when I was 18 years old and I pursued flying helicopters. I moved across the country around 3,500 kilometers away to Vancouver, Canada, where I am now, to fly helicopters. And that was really the dream. And the goal in that career was to do that. And fast forward through, a year of doing that and learning and getting my commercial helicopter pilot's license, I was failing huge, honestly. I was failing huge. So this is not a story of, success, at least at this point. I lost everything. I didn't have any money. I couldn't find a job, which we'll dive into today. And even though I had the credentials, I had the piece of paper, I had the thing that said, hey, you can fly helicopters legally and safe, I couldn't find that. I couldn't find the work. And so that lasted a year of me struggling and needing to move back in with my parents and leave everything that I tried to build in Vancouver. And I was in $55,000 of debt. My bank account was drained. I was in overdraft. And I was really questioning everything. I was questioning everything I was doing, my decisions. Was this the right decision? Should I have chased my dream? Should I have chased this thing? And I had to go back to square one. So I had to move back home with my parents, reassess, reevaluate, and go back to the drawing board, so to speak. So from there, fast forward, I decided to pursue aircraft maintenance. So I wanted to stay in the industry. I still wanted to fly, but I needed a different door because the door I was trying, what was locked, so to speak. It was boarded up and I couldn't get through. And so I decided to pursue aircraft maintenance, came back out here, decided to take on more debt, another line of credit, student line of credit, to pursue maintenance. So to become an AME, an aircraft maintenance engineer. And that's what I decided to do, another year and a half of school, 4 years total of education. And that's really when I got my foot in the door, so to speak. It took around, I think, 3 years and $70,000 of debt before I even were to land that first job, just to put that into perspective. Literally land. Yeah. So I'll leave it at that for now. Maybe we can dive in a bit more, but yeah, so 3 years, $70,000. And that's what it took for me to get that first job of finally getting hired.
Safe to say that everything you did paid off in the end and these pivots that you made, but it's fascinating. You don't often hear of helicopter pilots and aviation and things like that. So it's really unique. And that's obviously a unique career path. My father for a little while, my father's an accountant by trade, for a long time was a small airplane pilot. And it was something growing up, kind of hearing his stories was always kind of fascinating for us, for my sister and I, because it was you don't know really any pilots, let alone have one as a father. So it was kind of cool to hear his story too, and how he kind of pivoted from being a pilot to an accountant. It's quite the career leap, and it's kind of a similar thing here. But that's awesome, and what a unique story. And now, obviously, being a career expert, like I said, full-time founder, two-time author, you've been a TEDx speaker, all of the things that you've done to this point, it's really unique story. And I think, obviously, we have a lot of job seekers who listen to this podcast. We have a lot of people that are looking for new opportunities, a lot of people that are really interested in side hustles. The first question that I want to throw your way is, what are some of the common challenges that you see job seekers facing today, and how do you advise them to kind of overcome those obstacles?
So challenges job seekers face. Yeah, so just kind of a quick backstory as well. I pursued aviation for around 14 years, so I was real expert in that. And that's kind of when I pivoted to business. I started my first business around 2013, which was in fitness. I have a 20-year background in fitness and training and competing and bodybuilding. That kind of was just a side hustle. That was like something to do. And so I really pivoted into business full time. I'd say 2020, pandemic-ish, and 2022 is when I really left aviation and pursued what I'm doing now, which is a community based for entrepreneurs, is a lot of keynote speaking, leadership development. And so it's very different than flying, very different than being in helicopters, as you said. And so I've faced a ton of challenges. One would be the challenge of experience, of not having enough experience in your field. And likely for early stage job seekers, this is one of the biggest things, is you're starting kind of from the basement level. You're starting from ground zero, so to speak.
Literally.
Which means like you might not have the experience, and that's okay. That's totally fine. We all start there, no matter what career you're pursuing or what path you're pursuing, whether that's entrepreneurship or a regular traditional career path. And so what I want everyone to kind of come away with, or just some insight that I had, is be open to learning and be open to having that learning and growth mindset. And so leave your ego aside. It's okay to not know, not understand. I don't know everything. I'm not, even though I have a lot of experience in different areas and different fields, I'm learning every single day. And I think having that growth oriented mindset is going to help you overcome the challenges of, well, you might need to apply for 500 jobs, or you might need to apply for 1,000 jobs, or you might need to go on and knock on 50 different business doors to kind of get your foot in the door, or you go on the Swob app and start swiping, side to side and find that employer. So there's going to be a lot of things, but the thing I'll focus on is the experience level of you need to learn, and that just you have to have an open mindset and really just be willing to adapt and absorb as much as you can early on.
I love that. And it's funny, you mentioned kind of the same thing that we say, how we're still learning too. Like, sure, we have experience now, but we're by no means are we experts, and we're learning every day. And it's one of those things where you're going to pivot, you're going to fail fast, fail hard, but get right back up and keep going. And I think that's the biggest thing. And that kind of ties along with mindset. I think if you have that mindset where you get right back up on the horse and recognize that each step you take is a step forward. So even though, yes, failing, nobody wants to fail, but it's important where if you're failing and understanding where you failed, that's one step closer. And I think that mindset, that's such a big thing. And it's funny, like my mind as you were speaking kind of just went to triple F. I was thinking flying, founder, fitness, all three. It's awesome.
And failure. We'll do four. Quad F.
Exactly.
Failed many times, which we can get into too. Failing is part of it. That's
100%. It's so important because I think a lot of people have a misconception. And it's funny, like we did a podcast not that long ago where we're even talking about someone like Jeff Bezos as an example. And I think a lot of people look at him right now and think, like, wow, he's uber rich, kind of celebrity status. What they don't recognize, or what they're failing to see, is it wasn't a straight path for him. It wasn't a straight line. Like, I'm sure obviously in the early days of Amazon, there was tons of hurdles. And who knows, did Jeff Bezos kind of expect Amazon to grow into what it is to now? I don't know, but it wasn't a straight path. It wasn't easy early on. And I think oftentimes a lot of people forget that these guys started out just like everyone else did. They had to hustle. They had to put in the work. They failed fast. They failed hard, but they got back up and they kept at it, and they had that mindset. So I think that's a really important thing a lot of people need to recognize and remember. When you fail or when you're struggling, just keep going. Persistence is key. And I think, obviously now you've spoken a little bit about the pivots in your career. And I think there's a lot of people who maybe feel stuck in a certain role, or who are looking for newer opportunities, or want to start some sort of a side hustle. And I just think, the next question for you is, how would you say, or how can somebody effectively pivot their career into a new industry or role, especially when they might feel underqualified?
Yeah, great question. So, when I pivoted into, say, leadership development, into coaching, I really got into coaching, into mentorship. I work with University of British Columbia out here on the West Coast, League of Innovators, which is all over Canada, as well as Junior Achievement worldwide. And that was really in a mentorship role. And I didn't just do that because I was like, hey, I'm going to be a mentor. This is great. I really built in like 15 years of personal development prior to that. But at the same time, I was always learning and I was growing through education. So one example I can give you is when I really got into the coaching space of like wanting to support, wanting to guide, wanting to help others, I decided to talk to a friend of a friend who was an expert in that field. And I got his advice. And he said, hey, Chris, anyone I hire, anyone I work with has to be certified through CTI. It has to go through Coactive Training Institute. That's the company. And basically, it's like the gold standard of coaching and training. And so I started to look into more of that. And what does this look like? What does this entail? The investment of time and money. And I took that path. I took that path not only to become a better leader myself, to qualify myself better, but because that was going to help me in the long run. So just as an example, that took me a year and a half and $25,000, like just for that course, right? So it's an investment, and clearly that's not available to everyone out there. So I'm not saying you have to go for a year and a half, $25,000 investment, but what I am saying is you need to kind of up level your skills, up level your credentials, up level your education. That doesn't have to be in a typical college or university setting. That could be a sales course, that could be marketing, that could be something online. But if you don't feel like you have all that experience and knowledge, well, you have to get it. And you have to get it over time. That's not a week, that's not a month. That takes potentially years and years of developing, but you have to start somewhere. So what are the things that can get you where you want to go? Is that communication skills? Is that sales strategy? Is that marketing? Is that connections and networking and knowing and building key relationships in what you want to do? That's going to look different for everyone. But the key thing is being able to learn, being able to, like we talked about before, learning, but upskill your education, upskill the things that you need for those qualifications, because we're never ready. Let's be honest. When I pivoted, was I ready? Was it the perfect time? Absolutely not. But it was as good as it's going to get. So I said, you know what? I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to bet on myself and I'm going to do it. And I think that's what everyone listening needs to do as well.
I agree. And I mean, it's similar even in my background, in my story. Like, it was something where when we had this idea to start Swob, obviously it was a big risk and it was a gamble. And, we were in nice jobs. Having a marketing background, working in the industry, working so hard to actually get into the industry, and then finally getting in to walk away, it was scary. But it's one of those things where the way I looked at it was, if we're not going to try, you never know. And honestly, I would rather try this, fail, bomb, at least having tried it, as opposed to not doing it at all, staying in my job, which was a comfortable job. Like, it was something that I worked hard to get into, and then find out 5-10 years later, somebody else had a similar idea and it took off. I don't know how I could have lived seeing something like that. So I think that was the biggest thing for me. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people want to make a career pivot or want to jump into something new. They don't have the experience. And it's one of those things where you have to put in the time, you have to be willing to learn, you have to be willing to do new experiences and make yourself a little bit uncomfortable and try new things. You even mentioned networking. That kind of leads into my next question. And I think networking is so important. Like, that's one thing that I always push to people who are asking questions like, how can I get a job? I don't know how to start my career. I don't know how to find this. Like, what can I do? What are things that I can do? And I always say to people, like, you really have to put yourself outside the box. You can't just be doing the conventional, sitting there and applying a job on other sites. Like, you really have to do things that are going to make you stand out. And I think networking is so critical. Like, my first job in marketing happened because of networking. So it really is so important. My question to you is, what role does networking play in a successful job search? And what are your top tips for building meaningful connections?
Okay, what role does networking play? So for a bit of a background story as well, the community mentee that I run, I've hosted around 100 plus events in the last year. And a lot of those events foster networking, foster relationships, foster connections. And so I act as a facilitator a lot for these events. So I have a little bit of background, in this and fostering relationships. And it was funny because I was talking to me and my wife were chatting this morning, just before this podcast. And we're like trying to figure out when we last applied for a job and when we last even had an interview, which by the way has been years and years. But the reason for that, for each of our circumstances in different industries completely, is because of the relationships we built. And it's because of referrals. And it's because of those meaningful connections that we had years prior that said, hey, you know what? I actually know Chris. He would be great in this role. Or I know this person. They would be an excellent fit to your team. And so networking is invaluable. It's an invaluable skill. And I think it's only becoming more invaluable as the days, weeks, and months pass with technology, with AI, with all of these things that are removing connection. It's more important than ever to have connection, foster connection, and know how to communicate with people. And so I'm really passionate about this area. So as far as fostering networking, I would say something easy you can do, which I always always recommend is put yourself out there, kind of like you said, Alexander. A way you can do that is different platforms, whether that's Luma, Eventbrite, Meetup. Go to events, go to conferences, and go by yourself. This is a big thing because you might want to go with your friend or your co-founder or your partner or someone, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's your comfort zone.
Yeah,
your
exactly.
friend there, you're likely to stay with them, you're likely to stick with them. If you just go alone, and I'll give you an example of this. In 2023, I went to the TED conference here in Vancouver, 5 days, $10,000 USD, big money, big investment, big time. And I went strictly there to meet people. I told myself I'm going by myself and I'm just keeping the doors open and I'm going to build relationships. And over that 5 days, I met, I think it was over 120 connections that I made over that 5 days, some more meaningful than others, some more, dove deeper than others. But I really fostered those relationships, and some of those even till this day. And that was because I just put myself out there. I was uncomfortable and I was by myself, which is the other thing, which is it's awkward. I'll be the first one to admit it. It's awkward, it's tough, it's difficult. But the more you do that and the more you put yourself out there, the slightly easier it'll become to do that. So hopefully that answers your question.
I love it. And honestly, I think like it's so important to build meaningful connections. And I think, a lot of times I'll get asked from people like, oh, okay, so you say networking is so important. If I go, I go to an event, and like you said, there's so many platforms that you can use to find events. And especially here in Toronto, and I'm sure it's obviously the same thing in Vancouver, there's so many events that people can go to. There's so many industry specific events. The options are limitless. And I think a lot of people have a misconception where it's, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to speak to somebody for 2 minutes and then I'm going to ask them for a job. And it's like, no. And I always tell people, you have to put yourself in that person's shoes. They don't know you. They don't know you anything. You haven't built up a meaningful connection there. You have to foster that relationship. And then over time, as you become more familiar with one another, as you built on that relationship, then you could start maybe asking for a little advice or maybe a little guidance, or even to keep their ears open for opportunities that might come their way. It's so important. You have to build those relationships. And I agree, like it is uncomfortable. You're right. It is awkward, but you have to do it. And if you're going, like you said, with a friend or a founder or whoever it is, you're obviously going to stick to that person because, like you said, that's your comfort zone. That's what you know, and it's just easy for you. But if you go on your own, make yourself a little bit uncomfortable just for a little bit of time, you'll see over time it becomes more and more easier, and you'll be able to, you kind of refine yourself and you practice it and you speak to people, and it just becomes easier and easier. So I think that's such an important thing, and I think it's invaluable for people to be doing that because it's something where not a lot of people do it, and it's something that's really going to set yourself apart, and you are going to be able to build meaningful connections that you'll be able to have. And like you said, some are more meaningful than others, but it's the ones that you build those relationships with that you can lean on and ask for advice or whatever it may be. But I think it's really important that people do those types of things and make themselves feel uncomfortable, make themselves feel a little bit awkward. It's not a bad thing. Getting out of your comfort zone is never a bad thing, and it's only going to make you better because you're building more character, and it's just, you're growing as a person when you do those types of things.
Yeah. And one thing I'll add there, Alexander, is like kind of to sum up what we're saying as well there with networking is give before you get. That's a really great way to think about this. Give before you get. Don't expect anything from anyone. Don't be like, hey, what can I sell you? What can I get from you? All these people have more experience than me. I want your knowledge and your time. Avoid that because if you go in with that attitude, no one's going to help you. So give, even if you don't think you have much to give, you do. You have valuable insights, perspectives. Your story is a big thing. So leveraging your story. Anyways, give before you get. That's what
it's true. And I mean, I think like if you're going to an event and you're on your own, that's great, but it can also backfire on you if you're going to do those types of things where you're expecting somebody to do something for you when in reality is they don't owe you anything. They don't know you. So that's a great line. I love that. To go on to the next question that I have for you, how do you help people identify and leverage their unique strengths when they feel stuck or unsure about their career paths?
Interesting question. Yeah, unique strengths. I think all of us have some sort of unique strengths. Even if you're like, Chris, I can't think of anything. I'm not good at anything. You are, trust me. I know, because even if it's something unique and something different, it is a strength. Yep. And so first off would be identifying what those strengths are. And so you can use something like Strengths Finder or these different kind of online tools. If you think those are valuable, that's up to debate for you as a guideline, not as a kind of a hard stop. But you need to understand, okay, what are my strengths? Is it I'm extremely prompt and organized and scheduling? Is it I'm really great with people? I'm easy to sell to people because I'm just personable fashionable? Is it, oh, I want to be creative and I want to like, I'm better at designing things, whether that's like websites or something with a creative kind of spin to it. So identifying what those strengths are for you would be the first thing. And the second thing, like even when I was thinking about what I wanted to do for a job, it was like, how can I take these strengths and put them into work? Let me give you an example. As far as like being like a team player, like I always, when I go into the workplace, even in my aviation career for 14 years, I want to be the team player. I want to be the guy that people want to work with, that people like. And there's a big difference between being a team player and like kissing someone's like butt, so to speak, right? I'm not going to try and swear on the podcast, but there's a big difference there. How do you be a team player and be likable where you just get along with people? And yes, that's a job, person, colleague relationship. That might be different from your friends, but I want to go in there and do the best I can. So people are like, yeah, Chris is great. Chris is hardworking. I want to work with Chris. He does a great job. And so that's a big thing of my strength of what it is. But that took me a while to figure out because I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know the things to leverage. So once I kind of leaned into that in my career, I just started getting better results, and better results would be raises, would be more time off, would be promotions, would be kind of the things that like up level your status, so to speak, in a career, if that's a thing you want to believe. So I think identifying your strengths and then leaning into those strengths in your job. And that takes patience and that takes time because, you know, some people listening might be like, I don't know what my strengths are. Be patient. I mean, they will expose themselves over time, or you can use some of the things like we talked about, like Strengths Finder or something else.
No, I love that. And that's such great advice. I mean, I think a lot of people don't know what their strengths are, but they have strengths. You just have to kind of unlock them. And once you do, if you kind of lean into those and you build upon them even more, it's going to be so good for you. And you're going to have those strengths to kind of lean on. And I think that's really important because I feel like there's so many people who feel like they don't have any unique strengths. Like you said, you do. You just have to find them. And once you do, the sky's the limit. The final question that I have for you, Chris, is what are some strategies for maintaining motivation and resilience during a lengthy job search or a career transition?
Okay, motivation and resilience. So when I first got certified as a helicopter pilot, this was in 2009, so a little bit ago. Back in 2009, there was an 8-month stretch of me trying to find a job. And me trying to find a job that's like diligently applying across Canada, applying everywhere, willing to sweep floors, willing to clean toilets, willing to work anywhere. I didn't have, a family. I didn't have a relationship. I didn't have my parents out there. I was physically out here on my own in and around Vancouver. And so I had no strings attached. I could go anywhere and just drop everything a hat, like at the drop of a hat, so to speak. But I couldn't find a job still. I couldn't find a job. And so I was running through all my cash. I was running through all the bank's cash that I took out for line of credit and student line of credit. I was running out of all my credit cards and everything was maxed out. And so I know how it feels to be in these lengthy job searches. You're just not getting results. Honestly, you're just banging your head against the wall, or that's what it feels like. And it's really demotivating. And so rather than think of it, like at least from my perspective, as motivation, because you're probably not going to be motivated at 8 months of blowing all your money, your savings, and moving back in with your parents in their basement.
It's hard to be motivated in that scenario.
Yeah, it's hard to be motivated. So I would say, I'm going to flip it a bit and say, rather than being motivated, you need to be disciplined. And that's something, that comes again from my fitness background is if I need to wake up at 6 a.m. to go train, that might not be because I want to. That's just because I need to be disciplined because those are the goals I have, whether that's me looking better or feeling better or performing better at my job every day. And so it's really important to understand the difference between motivation and discipline. And motivation is temporary. That's when you kind of feel that fire, that passion of, okay, I can do this. January 1st, these are my goals, what I'm going to set out to do. But I mean, now it's February 4th and it's like, you know what, that was maybe too, outrageous. I'm not going to do that. And then discipline would be, I'm going to do it whether I feel like it or not. And so we need to be a little more realistic in our steps of getting there. I'd say that's one of the things with discipline. And then being resilient kind of falls within that discipline. So over time of kind of getting back up, like you mentioned before, Alexander, continuing to get back up, that's when you're going to see results. And unfortunately, there's no blueprint for this. There's no map. I can't be like someone listening to this, if you apply, 1,000 times all over Canada, you're going to get a job. job? Because I don't know, and you might not get a job. But you could also apply once or with one connection and you could get hired. So there's a big range of what that is, but you have to stay disciplined over time. And what we also touched on for this call as well is being able to pivot, iterate, and adjust. And so if what you're doing isn't working, like for example, in my case, 8 months of applying as a helicopter pilot, it wasn't working. It wasn't working. That didn't mean I was going to give up, but I needed another path. I needed another entry point. And like I said before, that's when I went to aircraft maintenance. I pivoted my approach. I pivoted my lens of, okay, how do I need to look at this? How do I need to go about this to get in the door? And so that discipline plus resilience plus being adaptable in a situation, that's going to help you to eventually get into that industry in a specific way.
I love that. And you're right. I mean, I think it's so easy. The difference between motivation and discipline, sure, everybody can set goal like January 1st, like you said, I've set my goals for the year and this is what I want to do. And you feel motivated and you feel great, but actually doing them and sticking to them is a whole other thing. And nobody wants to wake up at 5 or 6 in the morning and go and train and work, have a hard workout. And listen, I'd be lying to you if I said I do that all the time, and I should definitely start. But you do it because you feel like you need to. You have, it's that discipline in you. It's that drive. It's not because you want to get up at 6 a.m. and go for a 5-kilometer run or whatever it might be. It's, you have to stay disciplined. You have to stay persistent. You have to keep going. And I think it's so easy for people to be motivated and then have that motivation and feel so strong and encouraged, and then kind of fall flat and give up. And it's like, before you know it, it's February 4th and you haven't stuck any of the goals that you set out for yourself. And if you're staying disciplined and you're really kind of working at it and chipping away, the results are going to come. And so I think that's a really good point that you made. And I think it's so important that, you have to stay disciplined and you have to realize that, or recognize that, the more disciplined that you are, it's obviously going to, your strengths and everything is going to start to shine. It's a really, really important thing. I know I said that was the last question I had for you. Now I'm curious because I've never had a conversation with a helicopter pilot. What was it like the first time for you getting in the helicopter? And the first time that you flew a helicopter, were you on your own or were you with another pilot? And what was that experience like for you the very first time? Because I don't know, was it terrifying? Was it exciting? Like, how did you feel?
Yeah, great question. So the crazy thing about this whole helicopter story and journey is this was all like out of imagination. This whole entire thing of just like me wanting to go fly helicopters. It wasn't because I have ever been in a helicopter before. It wasn't because anyone in my family was in aviation. It was strictly out of like adventure and exploration. And so when I flew, when I moved out to Vancouver when I was 18 years old, I'd never been in a helicopter. And the first ride I had in a helicopter was like the discovery flight, they call it. So that's like the first flight where you go out with the instructor and they kind of show you and you experience how it flies, how it hovers, maybe like some really light emergency procedures that they kind of show you the capabilities. And I remember like as I lifted off like in that helicopter, I was like, okay, this is amazing. This feeling of like floating, and if anyone's been in a helicopter, it's very different than flying in a plane. So it's like that feeling of like weightlessness or like even just a cloud, like just having the freedom to go anywhere. There's no roads, there's no paths, you create it. And that was a huge part of that adventure for me. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was one of the best experiences, of my whole life. In 2009, the 4 months I was flight training. And the other kind of moment you asked about was flying on my own. And I do actually remember that moment clearly because my mom came up to visit. So she flew out from Toronto to Vancouver area, and she was going to come on a flight with me. And so that flight was going to happen like in a few days time. And I was going to do my first solo. So your first solo, it depends on who the pilot is and their experience, but around 10 hours. So around 10 hours of learning in the helicopter, you are apparently capable of flying on your own. So that would be like, you can do the emergency procedures, you can hover, which hovering is actually, it's one of the most difficult things, at least when you're learning, because all the adjustments are so like minute, so to speak. So there's a lot of critical adjustments happening at the same time with your hands and your feet. And so I remember taking off on my own at the first time when I'm hovering, and I turn around and the downwash, like the wind that comes from the blades is called the downwash. It's that huge gust, like blows throws my mom into the hangar door, like against the side of the building because it's so bad. And she's filming on like, you know, her super old school phone that's terribly pixelated. So I think I have a video of it somewhere, but yeah, she's like blowing back into the door and then I just like fly away.
That's crazy. Oh my goodness. Like I said, I've never had a chance to speak with a helicopter pilot. I've never been in a helicopter pilot. I can't even imagine, but that first time it must have been crazy. But Chris, thank you so much for joining today. We really appreciate it. I think there's going to be a lot of value for our listeners in hearing what you have to say. And for anybody who's interested in kind of following you along, learning a little bit more about you, where can they find you? How can they connect with you?
Yeah, for sure. You can connect with me anytime. Happy to DM me or anything. So LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, I am Chris M. Wilson. If you search that, I should come up. Feel free to follow me. Yeah, DM me. And as well as if you want to follow our journey, chrismwilson.com. That's my personal website and brand for speaking and community. And our community is the Menti community, which you can find more information about that at menti.community.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, appreciate your time, Alexander. Thanks so much for having me. See everyone.
Thanks, Chris.